So thank you all for joining us. I'm Lori Adamschick, and the goal of this talk is to help raise awareness of the cost of aging, something that you hear people talk about, but they use the term aging in place, but they don't really talk about or acknowledge that there is a cost associated with this. The vast majority of us want to age in place or grow old in our own familiar homes. And it's safe to say that nobody wants to move from the comfort of their home to an assisted living or, God forbid, a nursing home. The whole idea of losing some degree of independence and control is nothing that anybody embraces willingly. But there is a cost associated with staying at home as we age. And early recognition of this can go far in helping you stay in your home longer. So we want to talk about that, and that's the main reason. And to put it in perspective, I thought perhaps we could think about a story of a typical couple, Bill and Myra. He's 80, she's 79. They've been in their home in Kailua, a two-story home in Kailua for probably 30 some years. Their bedroom is on the second floor, and their daughter lives in Mililani. She sees them often, but she doesn't live that close by. Bill still drives, but he does have mild dementia. And Myra has got some mobility issues, so she's now using a walker. What happened is about a month or so ago, Bill took Myra to the doctor, and on the way home, he hit another car. And fortunately, it was not a huge accident. The other driver was injured, but not seriously. But this raised some big red flags in Myra's mind. She realized he probably needs to stop driving. And as it happened a few days later, when she was home alone, Bill was out with his daughter. Myra slipped on the stairs, and she wasn't discovered for 4 hours until Bill and the daughter came home. She laid there for 4 hours. When they did come home, they called 911. They took her to the hospital. It turned out she had broken her hip, had to be hospitalized, have surgery, and that was followed by 20 some days in a rehab facility to try to get her back on her feet. During this time, Bill was home alone. His daughter is a teacher, so she would bring him meals. She would come pick him up and take him to see Myra, see mom every so often. But for the most part, he was alone. And his dependence on Myra and this enormous sudden change in his routine really hit him hard, made it very hard for him to adapt. And this caused a lot of confusion, and as you might have experienced with your own loved ones, an acceleration of dementia. As a result of this, one night, he went out looking for Myra. He had forgotten that she was in the hospital or in the rehab. He wandered out at night by himself looking for her. Fortunately, one of the neighbors spotted him and brought him home and called the daughter. And she came out and stayed with him. But that raised her awareness that he now needed a lot more supervision since mom was not there, especially at night. So what does this situation cost Bill and Myra? Well, there's, of course, the out-of-pocket dollar cost for all the medical care, the ambulance, the hospital, the surgery, the doctors, the rehab, the medications, all of this is connected to Myra's fall. And we can't exactly say what it costs because, of course, we all know the insurance can make a difference, but who knows, 5,000, 50,000, somewhere in between. And then there's the added cost of having to bring in caregivers to stay with Bill. I'm sorry, yeah, with Bill. I forgot his name. Initially, the daughter hired someone to be there 12 hours a day, especially in the evenings. And that cost was about $10,000 to $12,000 for that month. And an unanticipated and very costly expense that was not, she never thought she would ever have to employ. And then there's the emotional cost to Bill of the car accident, his loss of confidence. He was pretty shaken up by this. And the additional worry for Myra and for the daughter. The idea that, oh my gosh, now we have to take the keys away from Dad, and what are we going to do about the car, and how are we going to get them to the doctor? And Myra's thinking, I can't drive. I'm kind of shaky on my feet with the walker, and how are we going to handle this? There's the emotional cost of her fall and hospitalization and rehab. So it's not just the dollar cost, but the emotional price, the sleepless nights and the worry that now we're a lot more vulnerable than we thought we were. And there's the emotional cost to Bill of that accelerated dementia, all caused because the change in routine was more than his brain could process. And his safety net, Myra, was suddenly taken away from him, and he was suddenly alone. So how do you measure that? It's very tragic and immeasurable. This story is, I put this story out there to make you think about the two ways to look at the cost of aging in place. One way is what I would call the cost of being proactive. That's the dollar cost of actually preparing your home and yourself in advance to avoid health disasters that may result from aging. Taking control of the situation while you can. The other approach is the cost of being reactive. And that's the dollar cost and the emotional price that you and the whole family will experience if you don't take the steps you need to take and you do experience some kind of a health disaster. So you're going to lose a lot more control and end up paying dearly in both dollars and emotional distress for that. I suppose you have to ask yourself, which would you prefer? Well, before you contemplate that, I want to pass it to Mike, who's going to talk about some of the things you can do to proactively maintain control while aging in place.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about being able to remain at home and aging in place. Before I go into the slides, I'm going to tell you real quick about my German grandma. She lived in Iowa, and she lived by herself in the home she raised her kids in. She had 6 kids, and I believe she lived there alone from age 65 all the way through age 92-ish. And I think when she approached 70, her adult children had a discussion with her about going to a care home. She didn't really have a need for a different care setting at that period of time, but the kids felt that that's where she would be safest. She'd have somebody there to help her clean. If something happened, there'd be somebody to be able to respond. My grandma did not look favorably on their suggestion, and I think a lot of people have met individuals who reacted in a similar fashion to that suggestion. Over time, grandma eventually, I guess, compromised with the kids, and they did a few things to the bathroom. They eventually had somebody come in to clean her house once a week, which was really hard for her because that's one of the jobs she had when she was working. She would clean other people's houses. And eventually she agreed to have somebody come in and help her bathe a couple times a week and do the laundry and things like that. So that went along really well for a good stretch of time, and we were surprised at how well she did. Fortunately, her adult kids, most of them lived in the same town, so they're able to stop by and help her with things, bring her food. It wasn't until she turned 92 that she sat down. They had a holiday gathering. They had dinner at her house, and she announced to the kids that she was ready to move to a care home. And they all looked at each other, and then they looked at grandma, and they said, "Who are you and what did you do with my mom?" Because this whole time she was adamant about, "I don't want to go to a care home." So the reason why I tell you this story is the story about my grandma, there was a good outcome. They were able to put things in place, make some arrangements, and more importantly to the story is grandma compromised and she was able to agree to some extra services, even though she thought she really didn't need them. But there came a time when she made the decision that it was time to go to the care home, and things had just become too difficult for her to move around, for her to heat up her food, etc. So she's the one who made the call. And that's what I like to see with the clients that I work with is, them being able to be in charge of their destiny and them to have the decision-making capability. So we look at a lot of things when we talk about the home. In addition to cost of remaining at home, there's a lot that goes into evaluating the environment. And commonly people think, well, I got to put grab bars in. That's a really good place to start. But I have to tell you that the list is much, much longer than grab bars. Is the setup really realistic for somebody who's going to age and who's going to have a really hard time moving around? Is it a functional setup? Are there stairs? How do they get from the curb to the door? Is there a hill or a set of stairs? And next slide, please. Is it in an area that has easy enough access to the providers they're going to need? Are they going to be able to get their groceries? Is transportation readily available? Next slide, please. Of course, you have to look at the size of it. Oftentimes, homes are not designed for older adults. Is there going to be enough time to exit the home in case of an emergency? Is the yard too big? Is it something? Are you going to end up paying for a lot of extra services in order to be able to remain at home, such as house cleaning and yard work? Next slide, please. And the other things that a lot of people don't think about is you don't know what you don't know yet. Laurie and I have kind of teased each other saying that we should change our motto to "you don't know what you don't know," because as you're going along, if you've never had any significant illnesses, it's hard for you to imagine how it would be to recover from something, even something not too serious in your 70s or 80s. Most people are going to be at a higher risk of falls, and hand in hand with that goes risk of poor outcomes from a fall. The recovery time from a sprained ankle for an octogenarian is going to be significantly longer from somebody in their 60s or their 50s. Next slide, please. So we want to take steps to address the risks of falls. Grab bars are pretty popular now. People recognize that they should have them in their bathing areas, but there are a type of grab bar, I like to call them balance assist devices, and we like to put those anywhere there's a change in elevation in the home. So even though you're used to going in and out of your front door for the last 40 or 50 years, if there's a step up, that's a good place to put a small grab bar for balance assist. And if we have back rooms that we have to step down into, those sorts of things. Lighting is pretty important, especially in bathrooms and for nighttime trips to the bathroom. Another thing we recommend is you go to your eye provider, your eye doctor every year to get your prescription checked, because that makes a big difference having a correct prescription. And of course, tripping hazards like throw rugs are significant issues. Next slide, please. Of course, non-slip mats. You do have to pay attention to your entryway to make sure it's not wet. One of the things, in addition to non-slip treads on stairs, I have clients that they're really good do-it-yourselfers, and one of our clients actually got down on her own and put painter's tape on the edges of the stairs leading up to her front door. And it was terrific because it was a really inexpensive solution, and her mind, without her seeing it, will see those colors, so it helps her to pick out the stairs pretty easily. Fall detection monitoring device. This one's pretty tricky. There are a great many options out there. Some emergency pendants can detect falls, some of them cannot. Some of them are waterproof, some are not. We actually ended up looking at Apple Watches for my parents for Christmas. And my sisters and I had a big discussion about the benefits of it. It costs money to purchase it, but there's not a significant cost going forward as far as monthly fees. And one of the things we encourage our clients to do is to be active, because if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And those who are active are at much lower risk of falls. And you talk about all of these things that go into making your home safer. And sometimes I have people who just can't see themselves needing it. They're really active. I have a client who goes to Tai Chi several days a week, and her balance is pretty good. But after discussing the risk of falls with myself, she decided she was going to be proactive and put them in. And so we were kind of joking around it, and trying to wait till you need grab bars is a bit like waiting for your house to burn down and then trying to go get homeowners insurance. It just doesn't work that way. So putting in the grab bars before you need them is a really wise decision. Next slide, please. Of course, your footwear makes a difference with your fall risks. One of the hard things for some of the clients I work with is some have memory issues and dementia. And at that point, it can become really difficult to consistently use a device to help them walk, such as a cane or walker. And that's just because of the memory. So if your doctor suggests it and you don't have dementia, even if you don't feel you need it, it might be appropriate to begin using it so that you train your mind. And of course, we talked about the grab bars. Next slide, please. Handrails at doorways and changes in elevation in the home. We really want to discourage use of ladders and high step stools, so have someone help you move items to easier to reach areas. Pets is a tricky one because they're really good supports for our senior citizens, but they are a big fall hazard. Next slide, please. I wanted to point out, I don't think we have it in here, but from age 60 on, every decade you age, your fall risk escalates. It grows almost exponentially. And the highest cause of hospital admissions and ER visits in the over age 70 group are falls. The highest cause of death in the over 80 age group is not cancer, it's not COVID, it's actually falls. So, it can be something very costly. And how much do these things cost? Well, my local research has found that grab bar installation costs anywhere from $150 to $300 per grab bar. Not necessarily the easiest thing to install unless you know what you're doing. But taking into account, grab bars and balance assist devices, non-skid treads for the stairs and in the bathroom, you're looking at probably $1,000 to $2,000. And, if you're looking at cost benefit analysis, just the cost, your copay to the ER is going to be pretty significant. Definitely a hospital, say in surgery, your copay is going to be cost more than it would be to make your house safer. So what do you gain from doing that? improve safety and peace of mind. And I don't know if everyone would agree with me, but those of you who have aging parents, who are adult children with aging parents, the added peace of mind is really big for the adult kids, because you're just dreading that call one day that mom fell in the shower. So even if you as a older adult don't feel you need it, it's really going to help your kids if you put it in. Next slide, please. Other home modifications. There are special hinges you can put on bathroom doors that allow the door to open. I think it gives you up to 3 inches more room. Widening in doorways is another option, so that you want to make it easy enough to get in and out with a walker. And if you're going to truly age in place, you need to consider, is the bathroom going to be big enough? Is the doorway going to be big enough if I have a caregiver? So some individuals are successful at staying at home, but they have to have the bathroom bathing area set up so that you can get 2 people in there. You can also put ramps in. They have all sorts of power chair lifts that go up and down stairs. There's even I think of it as a mini elevator. It's actually called a lift, and it doesn't have a big footprint in the home. Cost-wise, they are still less expensive than staying in a care home. Next slide. Some people are creative and they end up moving to the first floor, even though they spent the last 50 years of their life on the second or third floor. You do need to think about access. It's really hard to get over a gravel driveway with a walker and a wheelchair. Next slide, please. So the cost of home modifications, you talk about widening doorways to building on a new bathroom, depending on the home setup, can be, I would argue that the cost is actually a little higher than $30,000 now for a total bathroom rebuild. I do want to point out there is an option now. Several companies in Honolulu will do a tub cutout. So as long as you don't have like a whirlpool spa bathtub, you can cut out the side of it, and they will custom form something to fill in that edge so it looks reasonable. And then you don't have to pull out your entire tub to put in a new walk-in shower. So that brings your step way down to maybe 2 to 3 inches off the floor. And if you are able to afford the modifications, you have added peace of mind for your adult kids and improved safety. And it's still going to be less costly than a care home. Next slide, please. Alternate transportation is a big one. A lot of people have a hard time giving up their independence once they're told not to drive. So that's another consideration. Do you have people who can drive you? Are there other services such as Uber and Lyft, or in Honolulu we have the handy van? Are those things available to make it realistic to continue to live alone? Next slide, please. There are some volunteer programs such as Catholic Charities in Honolulu, or you can go through Project Dana. My understanding is the VA at Tripler does have some transportation services as well, but you have to sign up for them. And community health centers, if you happen to have your primary doctor with the community health centers, a lot of them also have transportation services. Next slide, please. You have online delivery services, another option for getting food. Meals on Wheels here in Honolulu is another option. We have several organizations providing that type of service. Next slide, please. Alternate transportation, the cost varies. Of course, if you're hiring someone to drive you, then you're saving a lot of money on maintenance and parking and vehicle insurance and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. No, less stress. I guess it depends on who your driver is, but the individual won't have to worry about where they're going and getting lost. That's somebody else's kuleana. And the liability of an accident for an older driver is decreased as well. Next slide, please. Accepting caregivers into your home. This is kind of a tough one. There are many individuals who aren't comfortable having a stranger in their home. And you also have to be realistic because some clients will expect their kids to step in and provide a lot of care. Of course, that sandwich generation has a great challenge trying to care for their kids and their aging parents at the same time. Caregiver services are available in many communities. It's kind of tough though because some of them have minimum service hours. And I think one of the things to consider if you have the financial means is to start by having an assistant coming into your home. It could be as little as a couple times a month. And they could really assist you with different tasks around the home. They don't have to be a caregiver to begin with. And one of the things that will help you with is if you're anticipating you're actually going to need hands-on care, number one, it gradually eases you into having somebody around. And number two, if you do happen to have a medical event, you're already on the account with the caregiver organization and it can start services pretty quickly. The alternative to starting cold, finding agencies is there's kind of a process to get started with them, and it can take as many as 2 weeks before they can put care into your home. Next slide, please. Of course, we don't want to burn out our support system. There are families that will absolutely refuse outside help, and I give them a lot of credit, but I do want to remind them if something happens to the caregiver, then what's the backup plan for the person needing care? So sometimes they can continue to provide personal care with having an outside agency supplement that. Again, going back to the story of my grandmother, is I really appreciated the fact that she was able to choose the time. If the family caregiver decides to do it all and something happens to them medically, it may force a move to a different care setting, such as a care home. Next slide, please. Social isolation is a big one. We run into situations quite frequently where Mrs. So-and-so lost her husband and now doesn't know how to manage the finances because he did all of that. And sometimes the role is reversed. Sometimes the female spouse is the one paying all the bills and making all the arrangements. The other facet of social isolation is if somebody has dementia, I want to make it clear, in early dementia, people can be quite successful living alone. Unfortunately, if they're isolated, there are things that have been shown to accelerate dementia and accelerate the decline. One of them is social isolation. The other one is nutrition and not being able to remember to take medications every day. Next slide, please. Depression is a real fact with people who live alone. Even people who have dementia who live with family still can have depression. And of course, it can act to shorten your lifespan. Next slide, please. So I like the word combat. How are you going to combat isolation? It sounds kind of violent, but I guess what we're trying to point out is you need to take it seriously, and it is a big issue. So if there's a way for you to call upon a support network to have more frequent visits to combat the isolation, we like to reach out to neighbors so that everybody kind of knows Mrs. So-and-so is facing some challenges, and if there's something that pops up, something you notice that might need some attention, then call the family member. Zoom is a nice option. I would say there's a fair amount of seniors who are able to use Zoom, but some who they have a harder time with it. There is a couple of different devices. One is a GrandPad and one is a ViewClicks. And the ViewClicks I like because there's no buttons that people need to use to place a phone call. It's more of a receptive kind of device where I could just call into my grandma. She wouldn't have to press any buttons to initiate the call. It'll just start talking to her. Next slide, please. It's good for families, not just the spouse, but for the adult children to start to understand who plays what role in the household as their parents start aging. That way it's a little easier. It can be a little easier for them to step in to help out once things change. And you could always, depending on your personality type, join a different group, a new group, to start gaining more friends and widening your circle of support. Next slide, please.
I
So,
think this is where I'm supposed to jump in,
okay,
Mike, just
go for
to
it.
kind of get you back or reorient you to what happened to Bill and Myra. What could they have done to help avoid the emotional upset and all the unanticipated cost of what happened to them? Well, Mike mentioned a lot of things here. Move the bedroom down to the first floor. A lot of people have got a living room or a dining room they haven't used in years. It just ends up being the place where you stick stuff, and that could have been turned into a bedroom. Get the car out of the garage, out of the carport, so it's not a so the Bill is not attracted to it. It's easier to help him understand that there will be no more driving. Mike mentioned fall detection monitoring devices, the Apple Watches, and there are lots of different things with fall detection monitoring that will notify a monitoring center, or could have notified the daughter and Bill when they were out that Myra had fallen. It would have saved a lot of time and a lot of agony with her laying there for 4 hours. If a caregiver had been brought in early to supervise Bill, it might have kept him safe from wandering. The Alzheimer's Association tells us that 6 out of 10 people with dementia will at some point wander. So supervising becomes really key to keeping people safe. And the GPS tracking devices, that might have helped with locating Bill if the neighbor hadn't caught him, out on the street. You've got to find what would be appropriate for your loved one. Safety adaptations could have been added. The things that Mike mentioned, like the lighting and the stair treads, the non-slip stair treads, and even the stair lift that he mentioned. It might be more expensive, but it might have prevented Myra's falls. So the takeaways from all of this are, hopefully you're reaching the same conclusions, that this takes some forethought and planning. It doesn't just happen. But if you do the planning and you take the steps you need to take, you can save significantly more than if you ended up moving to a retirement community or assisted living, or, as I've said, God forbid, you end up in the emergency room and in the hospital. Taking these thoughtful steps ahead of time to improve your safety and accept change in your home can result in your ability to stay at home longer. And isn't that what you really want? So I believe we have time for some questions, if there are any.